Today is the day we install a Velit Diesel Heater. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, let me know how to pronounce it in the comments below. Okay, this is how it comes boxed, so we're going to go through an unboxing process with a box opener, see what's inside, and start putting this bad boy together. Alright, the inside of the box contains the heater on one side, manual on the top of the other side, which is full of parts. Looks like we have a fuel line hose and fuel filter. That's a vent pipe. That's an intake pipe. Let's open up this manual here, see what it says. We're going to skim it for now and just take a deeper look at the pictures, but you should definitely get a cup of coffee and read this line by line if you're going to go for an install at home yourself. Looking back as I look at the footage and record the voiceover, this is an easy to install diesel heater compared to a hydronic system, which is much more complicated. And you should still read the manual and take your time and do good work. Okay, so this is cool. There's some quick connectors here that can connect to a stock diesel auxiliary port from your stock tank, so you don't have to tap that if you don't want to or take your tank down. You just connect your fuel hose to this fuel line and pop that connector on and you should be good to go. In theory, right? Your application may be different from mine and that may not work. So there's the stock cover on the Sprinter assembly, which is what I'm installing this on, and this is the one that comes with their kit, which is pretty cool, and it clips right on there. And then we just have a barb valve we can use to connect our fuel line, so that is what we are going to do. The size of this barb connector is 4.5 millimeters in diameter. So now let's just take a quick look at the $6,000 comparison, which is about $5,500 more than what you get from the Velit system. And this isn't an apples to apples comparison, it's kind of comparing apples to oranges, but I'm going to horse race these two products on the channel, so stick around if you want to see how things go. Right off the bat though, we can see that this box has a lot more parts. There's no manual on top. There's actually only one piece of paper in this, and that's the pick list. And what I've come to realize is that, you know, this system, if you haven't ever heard of hydronic heating before, it uses warm liquid, in this case glycol or antifreeze. Same sort of concept that's used to cool your engine in your vehicle and heat your vehicle through the heater core. This is using that same technology. It can heat the van with that same system, so it can pull heat from your engine. It can use electricity to heat that fluid, or it can use a little diesel burner. And that electricity can come from shore power or your batteries, depending on how you set it up. So you need to be ready to integrate all three of those fundamental systems I talked about when you put a system like this together. And that's the outline. No one's really going to show you how to do that in your van. So this is an example of what I would call a much more difficult thing to do yourself. I would actually recommend, if you're considering doing this and you've never done it before, you're probably better off just paying someone who knows what they're doing how to do it for you. I'll have a lot of videos on my process doing this, but you can see that it's just a ton of parts. Now, this video is focused on the much cheaper competitor, so I'm just gonna skip to that. But I did want to show this because it is an example of another option. I'm trying to be as unbiased as I can, and this is the most expensive, most complicated option that is out there that I know. So I'm looking forward to actually starting with a lower cost option that is simpler to install, and compare and contrast these two products, both from the do-it-yourself install process and also the use in the field process. Okay, now we're back to the van. We got our 17 millimeter socket, and we're going to use that to take our seat off. If you have a stock seat without a swivel, you're going to have a different size socket, but my swivel, which is a sculpin, I think that's the French word, is got a 17 millimeter socket. So I'm going to loosen all these bolts, take this seat off, and prep my install area, which is going to be under this seat. After I get my bolts off, I'm going to lift the seat up and move it to its storage location. And once I've got it lifted in the air, I'm going to remember that it's still plugged in, and that, gosh, the airbag could go off, and that could be like a 300-mile-an-hour explosion of a bag of air that doesn't get put back easily. So unplug your battery and disconnect your seat before you get any wrenches out to start disconnecting bolts. Learn from my oversight. Fortunately, no airbag went off in the filming of this process, and I was able to move the seat to a storage location in the back of the van while I returned to work on the diesel heater install. First things first, I'm prepping the install area under the seat, so I'm moving the cables that are in there out of the way. We have an AC cable, we're not going to use that. We have a DC cable for a DC outlet, we're going to tap into that, and we've left some Wagyu clip connectors ready to intercept that circuit, so that's cool. If you don't have power run to this location, you're going to need to do that, and that's going to be outside the scope of this video, but I do have videos showing me pulling wire from my power system to this location. Okay, once we visualize that, we're going to visualize where we're going to put this vent fan. And pro tip, don't use a paint pen, use something you can erase like a pencil or a dry erase marker, because you may change your mind about where you want to put this hole for this vent fan before you make the cut. So you might have your original idea, trace the line, and then come up with a new one. Ask me how I know. Then we're going to write the date and the word deployed on top of this heater, so that when it totally reaches into life 15, 20 years from now and it no longer works, and I take the seat off to troubleshoot it, I'll remember, oh yeah, this thing's had a good run. It's time to buy a new one from this company because they make good products that last a long time. And I won't feel bad because it will have lasted a long time, because I will know when I installed it based on the date I wrote on it. So that's why we put a deployment date on everything. You could use a label maker if you want it to look cleaner, even though no one's going to see it. Okay, so now we're just setting this down and we're removing some of these factory wires, which honestly I don't know what they do, on top of the seat, or sorry, on top of the heater, to get a better idea of exactly how this is going to fit. One thing I like about this heater is it comes with this metal plate. There's more expensive versions of underseat diesel heaters that don't come with this metal plate, and I can use it to just trace where I'm going to plan to cut my holes through the floor of the van to the underside of the van, where the intake, outtake, and fuel pump and fuel will go through. So yeah, I have the burner out, and I can finish tracing my holes, just like you learn hopefully in like kindergarten. So that's what I'm doing here. Pretty cool. Now we can lift this plate up and we can see a cut pattern that we can use to go through the floor. Now you'll see I have some sound deadening material here, and I thought, hey, I'll just put a magnet and then I'll magnet underneath the van and see exactly where this spot is from underneath the van. But then I realized the van's magnetic, so that's not going to work super well. There's probably a better way to do that if you want to do that, but I'm going to have to just do some more like guessing and checking. So yeah, because when I pop that magnet on the underside of the van, it just sticks to the frame. So it didn't work at all. But you try, this is the creative process. This is the working process. All right. So let's just drill a hole through the floor and see where it ends up. We'll start at the top and then we'll crawl under the van and we'll just hope it's in the right spot. I mean, this thing only costs like $50,000, right? So how bad could it be? I think that's gonna work. We'll just trim down this bracket with an angle grinder with a cutting wheel and it should fit just fine. I put a B for the bottom side. Unlike some folks on YouTube, I'm using all the safety features on this grinder. I'm still not bold enough to take those off, and I'm wearing a whole face shield. I just, I like my PPE. Too many war stories out there. I have a close relative that works as an ER physician, and he's seen too many things and they've rubbed off on me. Okay, don't want to be that guy, especially on a high deductible healthcare plan. We've trimmed that right off. Now we'll use our guess and check design and just go pop that under the van and see if we need to do some more trimming. Oh, looks like those edges could be cut off a little bit more, so I'm gonna do that. Okay, and the next step of our fabrication is just about done. You can never have too many hole saw bits. We'll just pick one off the wall here, get it installed in its little holder, and drill our holes. Another thing this piece of sheet metal is nice for is you can quickly decide what bit you need, and you can drill your big holes. Alright, getting this drill started in the location I wanted it to with the sound deadening mat on the surface was not going well. It was very challenging. It's hard to remember exactly what I did to figure this out. Oh yeah, I took the pilot hole bit and I switched that out for a bigger one. And then I also used another drill bit just to kind of get a pilot hole started. So, in hindsight, I could have just cut that sound deadening material out of the way. And that's something you could do if you have sound deadening material in this area. Just cut it out before you drill and remove it, and it will be easier to get your holes in. All right, with our new bit installed, we are ready to start drilling again. And it's working pretty well. A little bit of smoke, a little bit of burning metal. Wishing I was wearing my respirator, and we are through. That is the undercarriage paint that it's kind of like a rubber coating that helps prevent corrosion. Pretty cool that Mercedes does that. All right, let's drill another hole. So tapping the second hole with this hole saw was easier than the first one. I just had the workflow a little more dialed in. All right, we have some more fabrication to do because these holes are for our intake-outtake vents, and we need a hole for our fuel intake port. So we'll just drill that with this tiny little drill bit using this metal plate they send the unit with as our guide. Additionally, we're going to drill 4 more holes the same size for 4 bolts that are going to pass through these holes, and nuts are going to go on the other side of them along with this plate to hold this unit in place. Now we're going to use the friendly file. Don't write its real name in the comments below. To file off the sharp edges, and just clean this up a little bit more so that there's no sharp edges and we're happy and ready to pass things through these holes. Now we'll use some of our handy dandy truck bed lining paint to paint over these surfaces that have exposed metals. That's going to keep the rust off them for as long as possible, we hope. In hindsight, I should have put like high temperature rubber gasket on here, or silicone gasket material. That could have been a better, application for a high temperature product. So live and learn, but this is what we're going to use until I take this heater off to clean it or service it someday. And then at that point, I will finish the install process with that high temperature gasket sealant, and that will prevent rust from getting on the metal in the high temperature environment that is the space where this diesel heater is going to run. Also going to do some Bob Ross on this metal plate they shipped with. Even though it looks like it's galvanized metal, which isn't going to rust, I'm just going to put this on here because I'm channeling my Bob Ross right now. We're going to do a little night sky. Now that that is done, we will move to the next step, and that is just the assembly process of the fuel system for this heater. And this is a skill set in itself. You got these pictures, you got this diagram, but you still have to build this fuel system that you can tap your diesel tank with that's going to work for your vehicle. So that's what I'm doing now. Fortunately, this kit, compared to the one we're comparing it against, comes with, I would say, almost everything you need. And for a lot of people, it will be everything you need to get your kit installed without having to buy anything else. My other kit, I basically have to buy everything but the fuel pump. So that's cool. It's nice not to have to buy a bunch of extra little things, especially for a lower cost heater in the market. So I am using these couplings it came with to add this fuel filter to a coupling and some fuel line hose, just so I can visualize how it's gonna work better. All right, now we're back under the van. We can see our Bob Ross paint there, and we're just kind of visualizing how things are going to go under there. And this is the tank side of the assembly where we tapped into the tank. Back in the Sprinter, we've routed our electrical line for a fuel pump through a pre-drilled inlet in the floor. So that's kind of cool. And this kit has this clip for the fuel pump where we just feed these wires through. There's no positive or negative listed, so probably doesn't matter, and I'm just gonna go blind and see how it goes. But these just go together like Legos. Pretty cool. Once I got the wire assembly done, I can clip this clip to the fuel pump itself, and it's just like another piece of Lego connecting together. If you like Legos, you're probably going to like this. Now for the clipping of the thermostat controller. Looks like this has 3 wires and a little knob, so we'll just clip this together and see what we see. That was easy. All right, on to the next circuit. This is our DC power in, positive and negative. There's a blade fuse on this side, and I have one on my power side too, but I'm just going to leave both in place for now. Maybe in the future I'll take one out if I feel like that's important. But, having a couple fuses in a new installation isn't always a bad thing, especially when you haven't gotten through the testing and validation phase yet. So I'm just going to clip these eye bolts off and do some wire stripping of each wire, because I got my Wagyu connectors ready to go. I knew this was coming when I put those in, so the ports are there and we just need to plug and play. All right, the wires have been pressed in, the hatches have been closed, the cover for the 20 amp fuse has been closed, and we are ready to vacuum out all that metal that we have on the floor from where we cut holes in it. So we are done cleaning this van, this area for this step of the process, and we're going to put our heater in now. Pro tip, attach your pipes, your intake pipe, your outtake pipe, your fuel line pipe that you're going to coupling to first. It'll be a lot easier than if you thread this through and have to do it after. However, when you take this approach, it's easier to get your 4 nuts on. So you want to get your 4 nuts on easy, or do you want to get all those pipe clamps on easy? That's what you got to decide. Put your nuts on second. That's my recommendation, and that's what I wish I would have done the first time around. So we used a 76 millimeter hole saw to drill our hole for our outtake vent pipe assembly, and I put it in the bottom corner below the hole I originally drew because that gives me more of a direct line of air, and I didn't want to create any more constriction in the airflow for this heater assembly. I wanted that air to just shoot straight out without restriction to just help the unit operate without any excess constriction. With my handy dandy air saw, I cut a coupling out of this pipe to use to connect the vent pipe to the heater. After that, I threaded the outlet port right through, and then I had these 2 pipe clamps on there, well, one in this shot, so that I could connect these 2 pieces together. And then I realized my coupling was too short, so I went ahead and I cut another one, and it was a little bit longer. You can see it there. After that, I remembered I needed to do some Bob Ross painting of the moon when it's full, cover up all that exposed metal. And I should have let this paint dry before touching anything that wasn't the color I was painting with, but I didn't, and I got some paint on the vent pipe, which I had to try and clean up as best I could. Once that was done, I put the exterior vent pipe back in to place. It's not totally flush with the exterior of the seat. There's a little gap there, and why it does bother me a little bit, I didn't want to cut a big enough hole to cover that gap. So we're going to leave this like this for this version of the install. In the future, I may do something different. For now, this is going to be super good enough. All right, back on this side of the seat, we've chosen to forego pipe clamps to connect this coupling from one product to the other, and we're going to use some aluminum heating tape. We're just going to tape this all around so there's no air gaps, and that just gives us some great coverage. There's not going to be any back and forth movement between these two things because they're both secured in place well. Therefore, a tape layer is all we need to ensure that this thing's going to have a really good seal. Now we're going to go under the van and prototype a fuel pump system. And if you're watching this thinking like, oh yeah, I should just zip tie my fuel pump on my van like he did, don't do that. This thing is flat at 0 degrees. It needs to be between 15 and 90 degrees. So don't do this. Read your manual, install it right. It also has like a bracket you can use. But I just wanted to get a proof of concept, make sure this thing works before like really buttoning up my install. So that's really what I'm doing here. And I also ordered some more fuel line stuff for my other heater I'm installing. So I chose to use a clear fuel filter so that I could see more easily see the fuel travel through this system. Back on the tank side of things, I'm just coupling together fuel line hose to the auxiliary tap so that I can set this up in a proof of concept manner. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves though. Let's talk about how we integrated the tap into this fuel tank so that we were more confident it would work for us. My next step was to button up all these wires with some plastic cable ties, aka zip ties, getting everything looking pretty. We're going to switch gears here a little bit, and I'm going to talk about how I installed this fuel tap in this Sprinter tank. So this is the tap that comes with the heater itself, and you can buy these on Amazon if your heater didn't come with one, but if you buy the one I bought, it's going to come with it. And they say to put this, I believe they call it a stove pipe, directly into the tank itself, which means you're going to have to drill a hole into the tank and mount the stovepipe. That doesn't make sense for me. I don't want another hole where there's going to be a leak point, particularly because there is already an auxiliary tap built in with tubing into this tank. So if we can just tap onto the auxiliary tap, we'll be good to go. However, the auxiliary tap is only about let's just call it only goes about 2/3 of the way deep. And you want a tap that goes deeper than that. You want to tap your tank to the deepest depths of the fuel so that regardless of the size of your tank, whether you have the stock tank, which is 24 gallons, or the S&B tank, which I'm installing here, which is 47 gallons, you can get as much fuel as you need. And so I'm going to install this with the nipple facing up and just attach it with a coupling to this stock valve after I take off that mesh screen. And that way I'm getting fuel from the tank all the way down to about, let's just call it 1 inch of depth. So once it drops below that 1 inch of depth, it's only going to feed the main line. But above that 1 inch of depth, you know, assuming the van's level, if it's parked on a slope, it's got to be in the right direction. It's going to be able to suck in the diesel fuel into the heater. So first things first, we snake it in. And once it's snaked in there, we'll take off that little mesh screen because we don't want to have any obstructions in this tap that are on the inside of the tank. We want those on the outside of the tank so we can change them, aka a small inline fuel filter. Those things are cheap and you can change them much easier when they're on the outside of the tank versus if they're on the inside of the tank. So we're taking that thing off and just thinking for a minute, maybe we should coupling this thing onto the end of this nipple, but ultimately we're deciding now we're just going to let it suck up whatever it sucks up and trust that it's going to get caught in the fuel filter and nowhere else in the auxiliary line. Now that that's done, we will use a piece of this fuel line hose, the black fuel line hose that came with the heater. Another just pro is they send you so many components that help with stuff like this. As you design your fuel tap system for your heater, and we connect that directly to the auxiliary line. And now we are going to fabricate, which is just a fancy word for making something that doesn't exist. We're going to fabricate some pipe clamps out of stainless steel wire. Now I could have used a cable zip tie, and I was just more paranoid about corrosion or breakdown of that plastic in this tank over time, so I went with this. I also could have used actual hose clamps or fuel line clamps. I just didn't have any in my garage, didn't want to wait for Amazon or drive and lose build time on my precious weekend to get those components. So fabrication of wire clamps is what I did, and I ended up putting 3 on, testing 2 different designs for the clamps.
Third and final.
And now they are on and we are looking good. Trimming off the excess. This next part you can only do if you have this model fuel tank, which is an S&B 47 gallon fuel tank. So we're taking off this component, which I think is some sort of vent structure where it vents air pressure, so you don't run into problems with that. And I am looking to make sure my float valve is not caught up on anything. I'm looking at the baffle structure that's there, just visualizing where the fuel is going to sit. And then I'm looking at the stock fuel tap for the main fuel system, the primary driver, and just making sure there's no obstructions there. What I can't see is my auxiliary tap. So we switch that around, and now we can see that the auxiliary fuel tap is in the same orientation and really the same location of the stock fuel tap. That nipples, it's resting on its side, and so we just have good clarity on what's going on, and that's going to help us gauge our fuel. So if we're not getting fuel in our diesel heater, we should pretty much have an empty tank, and the vehicle fuel system is going to be very close to having problems too, because the depth difference is fractions of an inch between the two input ports. And then one last check of our float valve, and that's free and clear of obstructions, and that's very important because it won't work if it's caught up on something, preventing it from floating when the fuel level rises or dropping when the fuel level drops. One last shot there, showing a little bit more perspective on the difference in height between the tap we added and the stock tap. Okay, so now we can button this back up, put all these screws back in with Loctite this time around, so they are locked in the way they should be, using blue Loctite, because who knows, we might need to pull those out again someday. All right, moving forward, we are disconnecting these stock fuel line taps because we're going to put this ring back on, and it's going to click back on the same way it did when we took it off, but in reverse. And after that, the tank's done. It's ready to go back in. I'm not going to cover too much more of that because it's a long process, and I have a whole other video that shows all those steps. So just search for that on the channel and you will find it. Keyword tank. Let's focus back on this heater install. So we are back in the van. We're looking at our implementation location, and we're just trimming up some holes and adding some more paint to where this heater is going to go in. Now, one thing I really wish I would have done, I wish I would have removed all of that Amazon sound dampening tape under this device, and I wish I would have put in some gasket maker to create a gasket type, heat gasket type insulation material or material between the metal on the van floor and this heater, because once it's on and it creates heat, that stuff in between the surface it's resting on is going to get pretty hot and create some melting type smells. So snapshot of my future. Okay, now we're back under the van, and we have the metal plate this came with that we fabricated. Underneath we got our 4 bolts on. And now we're just putting together this fuel pump assembly. Another thing I wish I would have done different, but there's really pros and cons. I could have attached this fuel pipe and the vent pipe and the air input pipe and the vent pipe before I dropped it through the hole, and that would have made it easier to attach those things than under the van in this relatively tight location. So something to think about for your own application. Just learn from my mistakes and do that better. At this point, we are ready to turn our electronics on. This is a good thing. So this toggle switch turns on the power for the DC circuit that connects to our temperature gauge, and we can see that that's working. So now we're going to do a test. We're going to prime our fuel pump with a this is a not completed fuel system. We're just testing here, right? We're testing and validating one step at a time. So we've connected some fuel line to the heater with a fuel pump in the middle. It's going to a tank full of diesel on the exterior of the vehicle. And we're just going through these menu items, seeing what we see. And what we're looking for is the fuel primer option. And that's here. We can turn the fuel pump on by holding for 2 seconds, and it will prime the pump. What that means is if you're using clear fuel line hose like what comes with this product, another point in their court if you're deciding between products, or just fuel line hose if you're designing yourself, you can turn the primer on and let it run until you see the fuel go into the heater itself, and then turn it off. After that's done, your system's primed. If you leave that on, it will just pump fuel into the system, and eventually it will start dripping out of the outtake. Or sorry, the inlet. It's just going to drip onto the ground. And if you're under the ground, you're going to get diesel on you too. And then you're going to be in a situation like I was, where your overalls smell like diesel, and nobody likes the smell of diesel on your clothes. I don't care who you are. Okay, so we got this going, and we're going for our proof of concept. And of course, it's the rainy season, so it's raining, and we're just dealing with it. So the fuel pump's turned off, and now we're going to set a set point at a high temp, at a high speed from the room temp, which is relatively warm at 56 degrees, because this is an atmospheric river in the Bay Area of California. So it's relatively warm air temp. And so we want a high set point to really put this thing through its paces in this test of the fuel system and the heater. Again, we're validating. We want to make sure this thing works to specification before we button everything up and proceed with the install. So now we can see that fuel is being pumped from our diesel tank through that fuel filter, through that fuel line. That's what we want to see. So then we're going to stop that priming pump, and we're going to add our vent hoses. So one is an intake hose and one is an outtake hose. And we're slowly getting those on with different types of wrenches as we just navigate this pipe clamp in this tight environment. One thing I'll say with the vent hose that the exhaust comes out of is there's a little splice, at least in the model I got, at the top of the hose, and I wish I would have cut that off so there was no splice, but I think they put that in so it would fit over a little bit better. Nonetheless, we got it started, and this is what it looks like. I probably over primed it, so there's just a dirtier burn at the start of the cycle. When you do that, when there's too much fuel in there, it's just going to burn dirty. And I'm also not using the muffler. The muffler, from my experience or my vision, is only going to cause performance issues. It's not going to help this perform any better. If you think I'm wrong about that, well, let me know in the comments below. Okay, so this is our first ignition. The system's working. It's not safe to be this close to the exhaust, but I should be wearing a respirator or a rebreather, something to protect me from these fumes. And I'm not, so I'm just moving quickly with the camera as I just kind of watch this system operate in this test mode. On the software side, when the unit knows it's burning, the fan turns on at full speed, and that's what you're hearing there. So you got the pump from the fuel pump and then the fan blowing at its max speed. And at that point, the exhaust starts to burn a lot cleaner. You're not seeing quite as much of that like dirty fuel burn in there as you are in like a scene like this where it's, you've over primed and it's just got to get that diesel out. Okay, so now we validated that. We know it works, and we overheated our unit because there's no vent pipes cut for the heat on the inside to go out of. So the heater just shut down right after I recorded these shots, and it was very hot. So instead of letting itself burn up, it turned itself off and just ran the fan in without the burner ignited to cool it off. And there you can see some leaking of the exhaust from the perforation in the pipe, and I may just not have it on there super well. So again, all this is just kind of debugging and testing and going a little bit at a time to get a clean, really good install eventually. So this unit comes with pipe clamps you can use to mount these intake and outtake pipes with a rib nut or something similar, a bigger bolt, and I decided just to use a small hole with some stainless steel wire that I'm going to paint with truck bed liner after, just to be a little less intrusive on my van, and I think it's going to work just fine. So I went ahead with 3 wraps on the exhaust line, and then a 2-wire system for the intake side, which I'm nestling into these gussets that the factory's put on this body panel here, maybe even a piece of the frame. I might not be saying that right. So these are spaced far enough apart that I feel good about it, and then this exhaust pipe is far enough from the underside of the van that I'm not worried about excess carbon dioxide going inside the van. Now if it does, I know I got 2 carbon monoxide detectors separate from the one that's built into this thermostat, which is another cool feature it's got going for it. All right, so it's another day in the shop, and we have the system running again in a test. I've changed out the fuel line so it's closer to its final iteration. We have the pump over here much closer to the tank. We have a T-valve here because we will attach another diesel heater, so stick around if you want to see that. We can see fuel going through, and we have a little bit of a leak, so we got a rag there. And that's that. It's working, it's good. We're ready for our next step of the prototyping process, which is to build a mount for our fuel pump itself. All right, so that's a look at it from the side of the van. It's burning a little dirty as it goes through this fire up cycle, but again, I'm not concerned about it. We don't have a catalytic converter or a DEF system for this heater. Okay, so now we are checking our install with an IR camera. We want to see heat. We don't want to see too much heat. We don't want to see anything that's going to melt plastic, melt wires, or burn people from the inside. And we want to get an idea of the thermal radiation range. So that's what we're looking at here with this IR camera before we go further with buttoning up our install. Just playing with the emissivity of the IR camera itself, which I'm not going to into too deep of a detail on this video because it's not relevant to what we're doing. We're just validating that this thing is working to specification and just seeing how the thermal radiation spreads throughout the van so we can get an idea of how it's gonna perform when we put the seat back on and we use it in its final iteration. So we're just using this process to move us through the validation of the system as it is. So here's what I'm looking at and how I'm interpreting this. There's heat where we want it and there's not heat where we don't want it. So we don't want the unit overheating and we don't want a bunch of heat on the intake side. So now that that's validated, we're going to pop under the van and inspect the rest of our system. And it's maxed out, right? And everything's looking good. The pump's running with a steady metronome. Still have a little bit of a leak we need to fix with a fuel clamp, but everything else is good to go. So we're ready to button this up a little bit more when we mount the fuel pump, like right there at that angle. The 15 to 35 degree angle is very important for mounting your fuel pump. If you don't mount it at that angle, you're gonna have a bad time. So now we're drilling more holes. This is an existing hole. We're just making it a little bit bigger so we can get a rib nut in it to hold a bracket we're going to fabricate out of some angled aluminum to hold our fuel pump for this heater and a fuel pump for another heater we're going to install in a future video. So we got to do another rib nut because my bracket's going to have 2 areas to connect to, and what you do on your system is going to be what you do. This is what I'm doing on mine. Now we're going to paint some happy trees with our truck bed liner paint to cover up all the exposed metal we just exposed with the drill bit and prevent any type of rust, or at least delay it as long as possible. Then we get our handy dandy rib nut tool and we pop in our rib nuts. So that's the first one. Once that's done, we can go to our second one, just fill in that to see if it's loose or spins. Here I couldn't really get as good of a purchase on the nut as I would like with this tool. There's just no way to spread the arms of the tool all the way out. So if there's a better rib nut gun you know of, put those in the comment. Put those models of rib nut guns in the comments below. I will look at them and try and buy something that works better for my build. Now I'm using a test nut to just test the test bolt to test the nut, make sure the nut's not spinning, make sure it feels good. Once that's done, we're ready to go forward with the next part of our fabrication process. Now, people who are better at this than me will do some CAD work to design all this, you know, cardboard aided design, but I went ahead and just blindly went into it, literally just eyeballing all the measurements. And so we have two posts that are a handful of inches long, and then we have a support beam that's a handful of inches long. And when we put it on the first time, the support beam was too short, so we actually used a tape measure to measure it more accurately and cut it a little long so that there was no way I could mess it up. And then we put it all back together again. Then we figured out that that stupid rib nut on the driver's side was spinning, and we just let it spin. We decided this is not going to be done. It's just another stage of the prototype process, and it's going to be good to go for now. So we mounted the fuel pump, and we can shake the bracket, and it's good to go. We clean up our fuel line so it's inches above the drive line, not going to get caught up in there. And just add some extra zip ties for coverage just in case this assembly were to pop out. And once that's done, we are ready to prime our fuel pump. So we got our thermostat with us under the van. We're going to hold this for 2 seconds, and we are going to watch the fuel pump into the heater. And once that's done, we'll stop the fuel primer and turn on the heater. Now that we have the heater on, we're taking some measurements with the IR camera just to make sure the heat's where we want it to be and it's not where we don't want it to be. I do see some heat on one of the USB outlets. That's kind of odd. Not sure what's going on there, but in terms of this heater, it's looking good on the infrared camera, and we're just going to look at it on the outside as it starts to ramp up its process. Blowing some dark and dirty diesel smoke, which I think is normal for this unit. Okay, back under the van again while the unit's running to inspect everything, particularly the fuel line. So you can see some air bubbles in the fuel line. That's normal. No leak there anymore. That's good. Everything's looking good. So we are gonna call this good enough for now. Not done, but definitely ready for its initial phase of production and validation testing. Now that the heater is warmed up, we can see more heat on the inside. In the burning chamber. No.
Oh, does it feel comfortable?
Yeah.
Oh, how nice.
No heat where the blower motor is, and that is good. That's what we want. Now we're going to wire our thermostat wire closer to its final location. So initially I started to take apart the dongle that it connects to the thermostat with, and I realized that wasn't going to be super easy, so I just decided I'd put that piece back in and trim it with some wire cutters and run it right under the seat there, so I could then run it behind this covering for the B pillar. I think that's what that's called. If it's not, correct me in the comments below. Okay, so we're running this wire up this behind this plastic area, and then we'll just use 3 wire nuts to connect it back to its thermostat and some Velcro zip ties to temporarily mount it to the wiring on the ceiling. Next, we'll start putting the seat back in its final location. This is always a laborious process, and you never want to cross thread a bolt. One thing I learned, that if you use a punch to line up your hole perfectly and then start all your bolts ahead of time, things go easier. You can also use some lube on your bolts. Be patient with the process and you won't mess it up. Now we can start the engine now that everything's reconfigured, and we notice we have a code for an airbag sensor. That is because I reconnected the battery system for the starter battery before I had the seat plugged in one time, and it threw this code. So I had to connect my ProScan tool to clear this code and get it to go away. Fortunately, no airbags were deployed in this process, and in testing, everything was working correctly. Okay, now we need to reset our time clock because the battery was disconnected, and I'm going to show you that. Here we go into system settings using the mouse or the scroll wheel on the left side of the steering wheel, and we're just following this workflow, just going through our menus and then picking our time and setting that correctly. If you need to see that again, backspace and pause, or left arrow and pause, is your friend. Hopefully you're on your computer watching this. So we use the scroll wheel to go up and down, and then we press into the center of it to save functions, and then we're good to go. All right, it is a very cold morning in the van. Very cold, like 33 degrees inside, as we can see by this temperature gauge. So we are going to do a test of the heater. We have this temperature gauge as well. It's a little warmer because I was holding it in my hand as I was prepping this test. So now we are going to start our diesel heater, and it's showing a room temp of 41. We're going to do a set point of 99, 1, 2. Just let this thing run at its max, and we are going to time and see how long it takes to get to a warmer temperature. So not 100 degrees, but like the warmer temperature. So as the time lapse rolls, I'm going to talk through what we're seeing here. So we're seeing the temperature slowly increase over time and the humidity level drop. This is a good thing because you can set your thermostat to run automatically every day at a set time. And if you live in a high humidity area, it'll effectively dehumidify your van. The thermostats are also on the opposite side of the heater's output vent. All right, after 34 minutes, we're at 46F on that one, 14C on that one. But when we come back, look at this one up here, it's 71. I'm gonna shut her down because we're about to start driving. It actually feels pretty hot in here, probably too hot. River, are you comfortable?
Plenty warm.
Yeah.
After a fun day in Santa Cruz, biking and skating on the pump track, and then going to some friends to watch the Super Bowl, we arrived home late, put River to bed, and that gave me the perfect opportunity to install the mobile application for this heater and test it out. This is an Android operating system running on the Pixel 4a XL, and you can see we are in the heating mode. It connects over Bluetooth without any drama. So we're going to go to our settings, change our unit display to Celsius. That's wrong. I like Fahrenheit better in the United States. And then I'm looking at my current software version of 1.2.4. That seems to be updated, and overall we can see on the mobile app what we can see on the thermostat, just wirelessly. That's cool. Okay, now there's an auto start option here, and I'm going to play around with that. So we're going to set that toggle to on, choose a set point. So we want this to automatically turn on when it is colder than 40 degrees, because I want my super expensive lithium ion batteries to stay warm, and the electricity cost to keep the battery heaters on those is high enough. And I also don't want a bunch of high humidity in the van that's gonna cause mold to grow. So this is a really neat function. I can also set it to run at a specific time, and I'm going to choose 7 a.m. because that's about the time I leave for work, and I can verify that it's running if it's triggered at 7 a.m. and just get a better idea of how this auto start daily function is working for me and my van. The other thing I like about this app is I can connect with the air conditioner, and it just pulls that device in lickety split just by doing this, and I can use it as a remote for the air conditioner as well. Now there is no heating function on the AC, so that's a little weird, and I don't know what that means. And then the temperature in Celsius can only be adjusted on the unit itself. So you don't have the same level of functionality for the AC unit as you do for the heater, but it is neat to know that for both of these, if you're laying in bed in your van, you can adjust them from your app without having to get up and touch the physical thermostats. Or if your van's close to your house, you could, in your Bluetooth range, 30 feet or so away, you could cool down your van with your AC unit before you get into it on a hot day, or turn on your heater and warm it up before you get on it on a cold day. That's really neat. And on the heater side, you can set automatic running times. So, if that saves you from, having a water system freeze and a broken pipe, it'll be worth the tiny little bit of diesel fuel you burn when you're heating your van. And this concludes our nearly 1 hour long heater workflow install journey video. I hope it was helpful. Thank you for watching, and we will see you around.